All right, we'll use the handheld then. Here we go. All right, so I'm Bill High. I practiced law for about 12 years, and when I was getting ready to leave the practice of law, I had one of those great epiphany moments. I just had my biggest year in the law firm ever. In fact, and this was a big law firm. This is Kansas City. When I was leaving the practice, we had 330 lawyers. So big law firm, Kansas City. I mean, at the time, I think we were fifth largest in Kansas City, and on top of that, we were ranked as one of the top law firms in the country. And I had one of the best clients. And in fact, we just had our biggest year. And I get ready, and I'm going to move into the nonprofit space. So I've sat in your chair for the past 20 years. But I go and I tell my biggest client, I say, hey, I'm getting ready to leave the practice of law. And they're like, no, sorry, you can't do that. I'm like, what do you mean? I've got free will, right? Okay, so I'm gonna leave the practice of law. And they're like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, why? Why not? And they're like, well, hey, we're your biggest client. You actually have the best lawyer name ever. Bill High. Oh, somebody got it over here. Okay. Now, some of you guys are still sitting there trying to figure it out, what the heck is he talking about? But if you've ever got a bill from a lawyer, you know what I'm talking about. Actually, I do speak a lot. And we had this big event. We'd have 1,000 people come to this event. And one year, and it's like the Academy Awards of Ministry. And one year, my daughter's like, hey, I've got a new lawyer joke for you that you need to add on to your deal. And she's 19 at the time, and she's like, and here it is. And so what she did is she sent me a picture of a lawyer who had graduated from a California law school. Okay, so in California, there are a lot of Asians. Good thing, Asians are good folks, smart people, okay, all that stuff. That's my heritage. My mom's full-blooded Japanese. And the picture was a girl who graduated from this law school, and her name was Sue Yu. So we were going to be Bill High and Sue Yu. When I was, as the work has progressed, we brought on somebody from Oklahoma City, and he actually had a son-in-law, and his son-in-law was also a lawyer, and it turned out that his name was Michael Crooks, and so we could be Bill High, Sue Yu, and Crooks. Okay, so there you go. All right, so that's enough levity, huh? There are lots of things happening in our world today. So she mentioned it, Tricia mentioned it. We wrote this book called Charity Shock, and it's about the 10 trends that are revolutionizing the fundraising world. I'm going to talk just a minute with y'all today about the major donor revolution that's occurring. So we have never seen a time like this in the history of the world, ever. This is one of the greatest times ever. So here's what's going on. Have you all heard of the wealth transfer? The wealth transfer, I was just with Jeff Mannion, Ada Bible Church this morning. We had a cup of coffee, and we're asked, hey, Jeff, have you heard about the wealth transfer? This is the most profound thing going on in the world. It's a matter of pure demographics, but the number is at least 40 trillion, if not $68 trillion. If you want these slides, by the way, come up and give me a card or give them to Katie, and I'm happy to get to these slides. $68 trillion. Now, by the way, when I'm having this cup of coffee with Jeff, he's like, hey, I don't know what $68 trillion means. But you do, right? Because you're shaking your head. No, you have no idea what that means. $68 trillion, that's a whole lot of zeros. So let's try to put that number in perspective, okay? So how about if I said, Bob, would you like your ministry to grow by 1% next year? No, 10. Okay, well, see, if you grew by 1, we'd fire you. Most people would say, that's not very good. But 1% of $68 trillion is $680 billion. $680 billion. Let me put that number in perspective. We work with the Hobby Lobby family. One of the projects that they've been working on is complete Bible translation by the year 2033. You know what the cost of that is? It's about $1 billion. So let's fund Bible translation, and we'll have $679 billion. Anybody from a Christian college here, university? Anybody from that? Okay, so do you have an endowment? Well, how about this? How about if we give you $1 billion endowment? Take that. There's about 100 Christian colleges and universities around the country. Let's give all of them $1 billion endowment, and we still have $570-some billion left over. You see, we're in the greatest wealth transfer ever that's occurred in the history of the world, and the demographers tell us that we're unlikely to see a time like this again in the history of the world. So it's the greatest time. So you all should be sitting here saying, wow. I mean, does anybody here come and say, I'd like to get one more major donor, another major donor, more major donors? It's the question that we get the most often is like, tell us where the major donors are. And I'm going to tell you. But think about it. It's the greatest wealth transfer ever in the history of the world. Now, when we look at these numbers, by the way, here's the staggering thing. It used to be, the questions are different now. And the questions are different because the amount of wealth transfer is so profound that for the first time ever, people aren't saying, you know, you look like a nice young gal, and your kids aren't just saying, or your parents aren't just saying, we're going to give it all to her. It used to be that was the trend. We're going to give it all to kids. But the amount of money is so significant that for the first time ever, people are saying, actually, I can't ruin my kids with this money. And so I'm going to put some to charity. I'm going to look for big ideas. And that's what I'm going to look for. We had a conversation with a guy about a year ago who was getting ready to sell a business for $1 billion. Now, I know these numbers may sound profound and significant, but it's all the same equation. Maybe 2 weeks ago, I had dinner with a guy, I'll use a smaller number, and they're getting ready to, his share of the business can be $120 million. And he's like, oh, you know, I never lived at that kind of level. He says, I think my wife and I are going to be okay with 15 million. You be okay with 15 million? Yeah, okay. And he's like, okay, and my kids are doing okay. You know, I've got one that's doing well financially, and the other two, you know, if I give them $1 million each, $2 million each, that'd be okay with you? Okay, $2 million. All right, you're okay. So he's still got $100-some million, and he says, I want to make a difference in the world. You see how the discussion has changed? It is a profound time in the history of the world. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into this. And before I go there, let me emphasize this one thing. This is a time of abundance. It's not a time of scarcity. So no matter what you're sitting here at this room and this table and this time, you need to get it out of your head that there's not enough money. There is, but your message needs to change. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper here. Here's this idea of demographics. So I'm going to go ahead and put this all up on the screen. And here you go. Here's what's happening. This is not me being a prophet. This is being a matter of simple population numbers. So what you have are the war generations. There's about 50 million of them. They were savers. We cleaned out my wife's grandmother, her apartment. We were moving her, and she was a saver. And so one of the things that she saved is she'd save all these little aluminum foil things that she got from Meals on Wheels. She had a whole closet full of these things, you know, and it's because that generation saved. But as a result of their saving, they've accumulated a lot of wealth. They invested well, and they're going to transfer wealth. Well, they gave birth to the next biggest generation, which is the boomer generation, 79 million boomers, a lot of them. And anytime you have the pig and the python, and you got the pig there, you have social unrest. That's why we've got the 60s. And that revolution of the 60s then led to a period of competition in the early 70s where there's a whole lot of boomers. And so what do? They went out and they start businesses. And that period of time where these boomers went out and started businesses was followed by the greatest peacetime era that we've ever had, which allowed businesses to grow in dramatic fashion over the next 30-some years. And so by the year 2000, the question began to change, which began, what about all this wealth, and what do I do with it? And maybe my kids aren't the sole recipient. So that's where all this wealth has been accumulated. Now, the next generation, by the way, is where some of the problems begin, and not because of the people. The issue is that there's less Xers. There's only 60-some million Xers. So fundamentally, what's going on today, part of the unrest that's being driven, 10,000 boomers retiring a day, and there's not enough Xers to support them on Social Security. We will face a time of economic revolution as well. So this is a window of time that we have to go after, because all that wealth transfer that I talked about, it's sitting in a couple generations. Below it are the millennials. Least church generation that we've ever had. Church attendance is the single biggest predictor of regular systematic giving. Now for the millennials who get it, they're givers. They're profound givers. They're radical givers. Now this is why, by the way, part of the marketing message becomes so critical, and that's why folks like Do More Good play such a key role in what we're after. For the first time ever, whether it's business or nonprofit world, you have to play with 4 generations. Your messaging has to be distinct for every one of them. You're not going to go into a saver and say, give it all away. Now, to a boomer, you might. But to the Xers, it's a whole different thing, which is, help me find a cause, because my parents didn't talk to me. And the millennials are like, let me have some justice here. Let me win at something. This is part of the conversation and how it's changing. But you see, once we get past this wealth transfer, and you've probably heard these numbers, the millennials are not likely to achieve the kind of wealth that the previous generations have held. So now's the time. Now's the time. So let's go one more step with this. There we go. And it's this question. Actually, I want to go back one more slide. This is one thing that we like to talk about, which is a gift funnel, and it's maybe an easier way to talk about it in terms of the experience of the giver. So if you see at the top of the funnel is wide, but the bottom of the funnel is narrow. And so every year right now, last year was about $400 billion that was given. Most of what was given was at the top of the funnel: cash, credit card, publicly traded stock, stuff that was easy to give. That was the majority of what was given last year. Now, when you sit here as nonprofits, where do you normally go? You say, okay, we're doing okay on the cash side. The next place we see most nonprofits, we're mature now, we've been around for 10 years, we're going to go to planned giving. Where's planned giving at? It's the very bottom of the funnel. It's the hardest gift to get. You know why it's the hardest gift to get? Somebody has to die to make it. And nobody is actually saying, I want to make that gift. But there's all this other stuff in between that you need to be talking about and asking for, because giving is an experience. Generosity is an experience that flows down a funnel of opportunity. People give as they become aware, and we had a guy that came in first year, he was at year end, wrote out a check for $25,000, puts it into his account, and boom, he's got an income tax deduction. Next year he comes back and says, hey, I got this BMW. And he donates his BMW, X5 BMW, we sold it. And then after that, he's like, man, I'm getting the hang of this. And so he's like, I'm going to give some publicly traded stock. So he gave some of that. And then he's like, man, this is starting to get fun. And so then he gave away part of a house. And then he actually gave away another house. And then he's getting ready to sell a business, and he gave part of the stock of the company. And then he actually started creating accounts for other people to do giving. And then in his estate, he's got this whole plan set up where his kids could continue to participate in the giving level. By the way, the middle part of the funnel, Tricia mentioned it, is I Donate. We recognize the middle part of the funnel is that we needed a platform to help nonprofits receive gifts other than cash. And so that's why we created I Donate. If you don't offer the full buffet, if all you do is offer cash and planned giving, you're missing a whole lot of opportunity. But partly what you're missing is the opportunity to educate your donors about the joy of being generous. Okay, so let's move on here. Okay, you say, who are the major donors? It's not that hard. There's 7 categories that we talk about up here. It's the entrepreneur, the core business owner. It's the person that started their business in the garage 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And if I ask you, okay, would you make a list of who your major donors are? almost always they're going to start off in that category. Then it's the serial entrepreneur. It's the person who started multiple businesses. Sometimes they don't look like they're working because they're at the coffee shop at 10 a.m., but they're actually running 5 businesses, or they sold out of them. And then you go on, you say it's actually the retired half-timer. These people do have time. They're sitting on some cash, and they look like they certainly have the opportunity to give you some money, and they do. And then you can go down the heir, surviving spouse, the professional, the corporate executive, the professional, the lawyer, the accountant. Lawyers actually aren't that generous. We could go into a long story about that too. But in event, they're given out of income. And then you go down the athlete, the private foundation. I put private foundation at the bottom because usually there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But if you want to boil that down, if all you did was write down this one thing, okay, you ready? Write this down. Yeah, got a pen? Okay. Yeah, get him a pen there. Yeah, we're waiting. Okay, ready? Business owner. Write that down. Write that down. Because if you say, I'd like to pick up some more major donors, it's the business owner where you're going to find them. That's where the wealth of the world is today. That's the big change that's occurred. So all you got to do is sit down and say, who are the business owners that I know that maybe I haven't paid attention to? That's where this discussion goes. So let's start talking about what that conversation begins to look like. Okay. Have you seen these statistics? The number of donors is actually on the decline. The number of donors is on the decline. The mid-level to small donor is declining, and that's what the statistics are. And then on the other hand, you see this bottom statistic. Increasingly, we are seeing nonprofits that are telling us that the significant part of their budget is being covered by a handful of donors. In the church world, what we're seeing is that it might be something like 5% that's carrying 95% of the budget. Used to be the 80-20 rule. Nah, it's changing. It's at least 90-10 in many churches. But for the nonprofit, this is where the opportunity is. Now, there are anomalies. There are some nonprofits that I know are increasing some of their small to monthly mid-level donors. That's good. You got to keep working at that. No question. Don't forget that. But the emphasis is on the major donor for sure. And part of it is because of that demographic that I shared with you. It is that the pure, simple fact is there's so much wealth. By the way, the new tax act increased the number of givers, or the decline in givers, because of they raised the deduction level. So now it's 25 grand a couple. So a lot of people, there's no reason for them to give. They can't itemize their charitable giving. So some people who weren't inspired properly about the true reason to give, stopped giving. So there has been a decline. So it puts more and more emphasis on the major donor. So let's move forward and let's talk about what this conversation looks like. Okay, here's the 4 keys. This is what the major donor conversation begins to look like. Okay, by the way, I don't want to move away from the relational side, but Bob, you're a major donor. You give $1 million a year, right? Okay, good. So you guys can come up and see Bob here later. But here's where you start typically with Bob and the major donor. It's not actually these things, but it is typically just this. Hey, Bob, tell me your story. Tell me who you are. There's a whole book out there, a whole psychology around just tell me your story. And it's, if I get somebody to start telling me their story, then you start getting the revelations about who they are. You notice it's not, let me tell you about the ministry or the organization. It's tell me about you. And, you know, people hear me talk and they hear me say that. It's like, well, it's not that. Come on, Bill, can't you do better than that? But that's where you start. And you know what happens when we do that? We say, oh, Bob, tell me your story. And he's like, okay, where do you want me to start? when I was a kid? Or, do you want me to start with my business life, my professional life, my nonprofit world? Where do you want me to start? I'm like, Bob, wherever you want. You just go wherever you want. And I let them tell me. And you know what happens? As Bob starts telling that story, pretty soon he starts telling me things that he wouldn't intend to tell me. And he's like, I don't know why I'm telling you this. But we listen and we ask questions, all those kind of things. That's what begins to change. Tell me the story. Now, where does it go? Here's the first point. This is the big thing that we try to emphasize. What's the vision? This is the thing that captivates the major donor. What is your vision? What is your compelling vision? Here's the next point related to that. What's the data that supports the vision? You got to give me a statistic. You see, you're competing now. There are more nonprofits than ever. You're competing. There are a lot of nonprofits, so give me the data. 67% of our people are going to go to bed hungry tonight. And if we do X, then we can change it by 22%. You see, if you don't give me any data, you're just one more story. It's more noise. You talked about that, more noise. You got to cut through the noise with a little bit of data and vision. Now, what do I mean by vision? We hear vision a lot. And here's the point that is critical to you. Stop talking about your organization and start talking about the problems that you're solving. What is the idea or the problem that you're trying to solve? You see, it's not, Bob, what organization are you with? Door International. Okay, I don't necessarily want to hear just about Door International. That's another organization. But what problem are you trying to solve in the world? You see, that's the question about that. What's the big idea? Kierkegaard said it, what's the idea by which you will live and die? What is it that makes your blood boil? Because when you begin to talk about that, that's when you begin to capture the heart and you're on the nerve of where that major donor lives, okay? Okay, what's the next point? Next point is, okay, I moved to all this kind of soft stuff and now I'm into something tactical. What's your tax liability looking like? You see, now I've moved into serve mode. Bob, I want to help you because every single year, Bob's in this place where, as a business owner, my problem typically is December 31st. I'm making money and I'm going to pay tax, so I got a problem, so help me solve that. And that simple question might seem intrusive, but it's that's 50% of our work at The Signatry. We're a donor-advised fund organization. People come in, create accounts, put money in, take a tax deduction, and use it to support the charities that they want to support. So 50% of all the giving that we do every single year is in the month of December, and it's driven primarily by business owners. Trish mentioned it, we talk about the thing that makes us different is we believe that your signature is your legacy. And so we want to be part of helping people solve the world's greatest problems. Well, sometimes the problem that we solve is for Bob and his income tax liability, because the simple adage is you can give more and pay less tax. Or if Bob's actually really not that charitable, we're going to help Bob pay less tax and give more, because his motivation is tax. So that's the simple point, income tax. And then the third win is business sale. So the thing that is driving the business owner in many cases is the fact that they're going to transition their business. Remember that demographic issue? They're in the last stages. They've got to think about, what am I going to do with this business? And it's the point of sale that there's the greatest opportunity to be able to give more, pay less tax. So we say, friends, don't let friends sell businesses. Friends stop friends. And friends say, Carolyn, don't sell that business until you deal with the tax issues. And then you're able to give more. So repeatedly, 25, 30% of our business each and every single year comes from nonprofits who are wise. They build these relationships with the business owners, and then they say, stop. You need to help deal with the tax issue. Now, Carolyn doesn't have to be an expert on that. She just needs to be able to point them to groups like The Signatry who can actually come in and help those people give more, pay less tax. That's it. Okay, one last thing, and I'm going to have to sit down and give this mic back to Tricia, is this issue of family legacy. So you remember where I started? This profound wealth transfer, and the questions are different now. The questions are truly different. What do I do with this? What was I made for? What's my purpose? These are the questions that these major donors are asking, is help me begin to actually discover my own identity. Because what I did is I chased after success. I found myself with not much community, and very little do I understand my own identity. So they actually got to run the bases different. They got to find their identity. They got to help discover some community so that they find true wealth. And so when you start to engage in this area and say, man, what are you going to be remembered for? And by the way, are your kids going to be able to handle the amount of wealth that you're giving them? It's a different conversation. We could spend lots and lots of time on that particular issue. But I want to step down here, and I'm going to give you a way to, let me see if I can move forward. Yeah, you can contact me if you have questions about this. But this is the profound change that's going on in our world today. The $68 trillion wealth transfer, 1% being given. It's the major donor opportunity. You want to have great joy in your work? Not only, Bob, should you engage in this work with the people that you serve, but engage in a different conversation with the major donors that allows you to walk in and to serve them at their point of need. Tell me your story, Carolyn. Life begins to change when you start to hear the story. And then those other questions that I'm giving you are really driven around, Carolyn, how can I serve you? And ultimately, how can I help Carolyn live the legacy that she was meant to by investing in the causes that she cares about, and perhaps being part of some of the change in the world that she wants to be. So that's what you're after here. Greatest time in the history of the world. Don't miss out. All right, Tricia.